and evolution. How we define law depends greatly on what we believe. The definition of law, therefore, varies from religion to religion, culture to culture, and from philosophy to philosophy. Those who hold to the Christian faith see law as an ultimate order of the universe. It is the invariable factor in a variable world, the unchanging order in a changing universe. Law for the Christian is thus absolute, final, and an aspect of God's creation and a manifestation of His nature. In terms of this, the Christian can hold that right is right and wrong is wrong, that good and evil are unchanging moral categories rather than relative terms. From an evolutionary perspective, however, we have a very different concept of law. The universe is evolving, and the one constant factor is change. It is impossible, therefore, to speak of any absolute law. The universe has evolved by means of chance variations, and no law has any ultimacy or absolute truth. As a result, when we talk about law, we're talking about social customs or mores and about statistical averages. Social customs change, and what was law to the ancient Gauls is not law to the modern Frenchmen. We can expect men's ideas of law to change as their societies change and evolve. Moreover, statistics give us an average and a mean which determine normality, and our ideas of law are governed by what is customary and socially accepted. For example, Emile Durkheim, in The Rules of Sociological Method, had a chapter, quote, on the normality of crime, end quote. First of all, Durkheim saw crime as normal, quote, because a society exempt from it, it is ultimate. There appears to be two subjects in that. Oh, I see. Duh. Because a society exempt from it is utterly impossible, end quote. Every society in every age has its criminals, therefore crime is a part of normality. Second, since Durkheim believed in evolution rather than God, there was for him no law of God declaring crimes to be evil. The only thing against crime is social disapproval and condemnation, and this rests on the organization of society. If society were differently organized, these crimes might be regarded as desirable traits. Third, crime makes for progress because it challenges authority, and, according to Durkheim, quote, to make progress, individual originality must be able to express itself, end quote. The criminal thus breaks up the fixity of society from below so that the idealist above can find expression and freedom. The criminal is thus the ally of the social revolutionist. Fourth, the criminal himself is a pioneer of evolution. As Durkheim said, quote, where crime exists, collective sentiments are sufficiently flexible to take on a new form, and crime sometimes helps to determine the form they will take. How many times, indeed, it is only an anticipation of future morality, a step toward what will be. End quote. Instead of being a parasite and an unsocial being, the criminal is thus, for Durkheim, an evolutionary pioneer. Quote, crime, for its part, must no longer be conceived as an evil that cannot be too much suppressed. End quote. Crime, then, must be given serious sociological attention. Quote, if crime is not pathological at all, the object of punishment cannot be to cure it, and its true function must be sought elsewhere. End quote. Fifth, Durkheim stated, quote, the various principles we have established up to the present are, then, closely interconnected. In order that sociology may be a true science of things, the generality of phenomena must be taken as a criterion of their A bit of a mouthful. The generality of phenomena must be taken. Just didn't have The generality of phenomena must be taken as a criterion of their normality. End quote. In other words, any criminal activity, as it becomes prevalent, becomes normal and acceptable. Instead of talking then about a breakdown of law and order, the evolutionist must logically talk about changing the law, because the current crimes and perversions are becoming the new law of society. Those who hold to the old immorality are now the social deviates. A mother, herself a biologist, complained to me a few years ago that her son, finding the lawless nature of his classmates uncongenial, had withdrawn from his studies. The teacher's comment to the mother was that her boy was the, quote, deviate, end quote. In terms of Durkheim's statistical standard, the teacher was right. In terms of this evolutionary standard, all who oppose departures from law, all who hold to an undeviating good and evil, are dubbed extremists and social deviates. In terms of social evolution, man finds himself perpetually in the social self. Man must always be in tune with the social scene. He must be it. He must be with it to be himself. Okay. He must be with it to be himself. Thus, Charles H. Cooley, in writing on, quote, the social self, end quote, said that the individual, the I, is a militant social tendency working to hold and enlarge its place in a general current of tendencies. So far as it can, it waxes, as all life does. To think of it as apart from society is a palpable absurdity of which no one could be guilty who really saw it as a fact of life. End quote. Cooley then quoted Goethe, quote, only in man does man know himself. Life alone teaches each one what he is. End quote. In other words, man is a product of social evolution. Therefore, he cannot be defined in terms of God. He can be defined only in terms of the social scene. He is nothing in himself. Man is only an aspect and part of society. To think of man as anything apart from society could be called, quote, a palpable absurdity, end quote. Man, then, is simply a social animal, and he can only be known and defined in terms of his pack, society. In terms of this, man, instead of being created in the image of God, is created in the image of society. Man, instead of being governed by the law of God, is then accordingly governed by the law of the pack, the law of society and evolution. There is then no higher law. There is only the law of society as it evolves. What is right today may be wrong tomorrow. What is perversion today may be noble, quote, platonic, end quote, love tomorrow. Law has no ultimate truth to it, no absolute morality undergirding it. It is simply social custom and the force of the state. For biblical faith, man is not a creature of social evolution, but the creature of God, created in his image, with knowledge, righteousness, and holiness, and with dominion. Genesis 1:27 and 28, Colossians 3:14, Ephesians 4:24. Man is to be understood, therefore, not by reference to society, but by reference to God. The law of man's being is derived not from society, but from God, his maker. God's law is a condition of man's life and its ground for health. As Moses said, quote, the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes that he might preserve us alive. Deuteronomy 6:24. Again, quote, justice and only justice you shall pursue, that you may live. Deuteronomy 16:20, New American Standard. Instead of being judged socially, men and societies must be judged religiously by the sovereign and triune God. But for Auguste Comte, in his study, The Positive Philosophy, quote, "Social phenomena are subject to natural laws," end quote. That is, society is a product. I'm a little bit swishy. That is, society is a product of biology and cannot transcend it. Man is not more than his biology. If man is no more than biology, then man's law is no more than a phase of his social evolution, and will change as man changes. There is thus no absolute right and wrong in any evolutionary system of law, so that evolution is in essence hostile to the very idea of law. Law implies an unchanging order, a final standard, whereas evolution insists that law is social experience, custom and mores. As a result, evolutionary thinking is unable to formulate a concept of law. It uses law as an instrument of social change. Evolutionary thinking makes law relative and changing, but the mechanism of change is thereby made absolute. Now, the mechanism of evolution has been natural process, but it has become increasingly the scientific socialist state and its elite planners. When man is made controller of his own evolution by means of the state is made into the new absolute. Hegel, in accepting social evolution, made the state the new god of being. The followers of Hegel in absolutizing the state are Marxists, Fabian and other socialists, pragmatists, and virtually all modern schools of thought. In brief, God and his transcendental law are dropped in favour of a new god, the state. Evolution thus leads not only to revolution but to totalitarianism. Social evolutionary theory, as it came to focus in Hegel, made the state the new god of being. Biological evolutionary thinking, as it has developed since Darwin, has made revolution the great instrument of this new god and the means to establishment of this new god, the scientific socialist state. The world, therefore, is committed to... I was congratulating on myself on how well I was doing. The world, therefore, is committed to revolution because it is committed to evolution. The world is dedicated to change without meaning because it is governed by law without God. Crisis succeeds crisis because revolutionary change is man's new idea of health, and in every change, the state emerges more powerful and more clearly as man's new God and Saviour. There can be no withstanding this new God, except by means of the only true God. Except the Lord build a house, they labour in vain that build it. Psalm 127, 1. All right, well, that was chipper. Let's scooch on to chapter 10, shall we? 10. Law and alchemy. An important factor in history has been alchemy. Alchemy is a belief that the baser metals can be transmuted into gold and that the processes of life can be reversed so that aging can give way to youth. Its origins are in antiquity, going back at least to Babylon. According to alchemists, nature is in process of evolution, and the goal of evolution is upwards. All the variations in nature are imperfections, failures, and experiments towards the realization of the best. Hence, in the world of metals, all metals other than gold are imperfections and abortions of nature, experiments that failed. Whether in the Near East, ancient China, Indochina, India, or elsewhere, man in antiquity believed extensively in the natural metamorphosis of metals. The basis of this faith was evolutionary. Nature is in process of development, and the best in nature represents the present highest form of development and the potential of all other forms. The purpose of the alchemist was to speed up this natural evolutionary process. Thus, a 14th century work on alchemy, the Summa Perfectionis, stated that, quote, "What nature cannot perfect in a vast space of time, we can achieve in a short space of time by our art." End quote. I'm going to have to swish my mouth out. Getting a bit squishy. In other words, the alchemist's science would, by experimentation, accomplish what normally millions of years were required to do. In his play, The Alchemist, Ben Jonson stated the same idea, quote, "The eggs ordained by nature to that end, and is a chicken in potential, the same we say of lead and other metals, which would be gold if they had the time, and that our art doth further." Act 2, Scene 2. Similarly, death is seen as a failure which evolution will someday overcome, as it will also overcome aging, and so the alchemist dedicated himself also to speeding up evolution, to produce the youthful and immortal man as the new god over creation. The alchemist depended in part on a return to the beginning, to chaos, to create the forward thrust of evolution. Mircea Eliade, in The Forge in the Church, quotes an old Taoist Zen document to illustrate this point, quote, "By returning to the base, the origin, we drive away old age, we return to the condition of the fetus." End quote. Eliade comments, quote, "Now this return to the beginning, as we have just seen, was what the alchemist also sought by other means." End quote. In other words, evolution requires chaos, revolution to effect regeneration. The purpose of the alchemist was to create the conditions of chaos in order to further the leap ahead in evolution. It is not at all surprising, therefore, that in the Enlightenment, alchemists were closely allied to and central in the forces of evolution. Revolution is simply the theory of social alchemy. According to Paracelsus, the world must, quote, "enter into its mother," end quote, that is, into chaos, into the abyss, in order to achieve eternity. The alchemists talked about being born again, as occultists do today, but they meant by it the return to chaos as a means of regeneration. There are strong elements of alchemy in psychoanalysis. By means of analysis, the patient is regressed into the primitive, anarchic unconscious and is supposedly thereby released from bondage and socially revitalized. In order to be an alchemist, it was necessary to negate the present order in the name of primeval chaos. This meant denying law and order as sterile and finding power in chaos. Basil Valentine said, quote, "Evil must become the same as good," end quote, for the adept. Perfect knowledge meant denying all present values in favor of the power of chaos to create a new order. The purpose of the alchemist was thus to further evolution by acting as the agent of evolution. Squishy mouth. In Eliade's words, quote, "One common factor emerges from all these tentative problems." I don't know whether it's a girl or a boy. One common factor emerges from all these tentative probings. In taking upon himself the responsibility of changing nature, man put himself in the place of time, that which would have required millennia or aeons to ripen in the depths of the earth, the metallurgists and alchemists claim to be able to achieve in a few weeks. End quote. Eliade states further that the tools and equipment of the alchemist, quote, "his furnaces, His retorts play an even more ambitious role. These pieces of apparatus are at the very centre of a return to primordial chaos, a rehearsal of cosmogony. End quote. Thus, alchemy is the metamorphosis, the transmutation, the change of man and his world by means of chaos. Man speeds up his own evolution by recreating the original chaos of being. Revolution is simply the theory of social alchemy. Alchemy did not die out with the decline of alchemists in the 18th century. It simply gave way to a new form, to social and biological evolution. Evolution is alchemy brought up to date. It is the same age-old dream as ever appearing as true science, which offers to man the opportunity to be his own God. Even Eliade, who is by no means an orthodox believer, states all the same, quote, "We must not believe that the triumph of experimental science reduced to naught the dreams and ideals of the alchemists. On the contrary, the ideology of the new epoch, crystallized around the myth of infinite progress and boosted by the experimental sciences and the progress of industrialization, which dominated and inspired the world of the whole. Which dominated and inspired the whole of the 19th century, takes up and carries forward, despite its radical secularization, the millenary dream of the alchemist." End quote. We can add that modern socialism and evolutionary thinking are even more rigorously forms of alchemy. Man dreams of remaking nature and conquering time. Man denies that God's law governs the universe and that it governs absolutely. Instead, he sees all things as evolving out of chaos, and man seeks to govern that evolution by becoming himself the principle of chaos. As a result, revolutionary man, the new principle of chaos, plunges the world into the abyss of revolution and chaos. Man creates planned chaos in every realm in the expectation of fertility. Not order, but chaos rules in art. Art that moves in terms of law is regarded as dull, sterile, and academic. Planned chaos governs economics, and the economic law is denied. Education works to create rootlessness, which is allied to chaos as a precondition of education and intellectualism. In every area, man creates revolution and chaos in the faith that a brave new world will thereby be born. The creative person is seen not as the disciplined man, but as the undisciplined, chaotic person, a lawless creature whose every act is a ritual invocation of chaos. Bohemianism rests. Bohemianism in art rests on this faith. The artist is an alchemist who can only invoke. Pardon me. The artist is an alchemist who can only invoke the basic fertility of the universe by means of chaos. By returning to chaos, he supposedly leaps ahead in time. He becomes the man of tomorrow with more vigor and power because he is more lawless. In religion, we are told that conformity to God's infallible word is sterile and deadening. Man's religious freedom supposedly involves rebellion against God's ordered, final and infallible truth. Man must turn from God's ordered world to the chaos and abyss of existentialism, and then somehow out of this will come forth true religion. The dark night of the soul as the chaos of unbeing is invoked as the way of the future, as the way to the future. Complacent. The dark night of the soul as the chaos of unbeing is invoked as the way to the future. In the nightmares of alchemy, in all its many forms, evolution and revolution, art and religion, wherever we meet it, There do we see the modern Babylonian captivity of man. Man is in Babylon. Man is in a captivity of his own making, his own hands, his mind. Science, religion, and politics have forged the change of his new Babylonian captivity. Man is his own prisoner and his own tormentor. Man tortures himself with horrors of his own devising, and denying God, calls out vainly to himself for help. Man has built a fresh Tower of Babel, and is his own punishment and prison. Alchemy, in all its modern forms, has been partially successful. It has created chaos successfully, but it has not brought a new order out of that chaos. It has successfully killed men, but it has not been able to make them alive. Instead of evolution, it has precipitated social devolution. We cannot counteract alchemy except by means of a biblical faith, one firmly grounded on creationism. And this is our hope of progress, our strength and our security, and in Christ is our liberty. They that trust in the Lord shall be as Mount Zion, which cannot be removed, but abideth forever. Psalm 125:1. The Lord reigneth, let the earth rejoice, let the multitudes of isles be glad thereof. Psalm 97:1. For God is the King of all the earth, sing ye praises with understanding. Psalm 47:7. Oh, look at Dockley. Look at Dockley. Oh, great. Alrighty, well, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm just going to switch the camera on and off, not that you'll notice, but I hope you're enjoying it. As always, if you do like this work and you want to support it, you can like, share, comment, send me a message. If you want to support it financially so I can do more better work, then by all means do so by going to nathanteacher.com and clicking on the Donate button. Donate. All right, so, yeah, that's me. I'm back. Didn't take long, did it? Okay, let's try chapter 11's. 11. Law and academic freedom. One of the growing problems of our day is academic freedom. It's a subject which tends to breed intense feelings on both sides. The subject itself has ceased to be academic. It has become an issue of major social concern. Let's examine, first of all, the argument of those who call themselves advocates of academic freedom. A good case in point is Emory University, a Methodist school where Professor Thomas J.J. Altizer teaches. Altizer, whose position is basically Buddhist, is the leader of the God is Dead movement, and this is recognized by the College of Bishops, southeastern jurisdiction of the Methodist Church. Of Altizer's arguments, the bishop said, quote, "Such declarations are pure fantasy, unsupported by any responsible scientific knowledge, and contradicted by the long experience of man on the earth, and by the unnumbered millions who in the present know the Almighty as a living God." End quote. In passing, we can note that the bishops do not answer Altizer with the word of God, but rather with the experience of man. However, they do oppose Altizer. They do say, quote, "We are amazed that a professor of the Bible and religion in a church college should say," end quote, "such things." The bishops also make clear that Altizer does not speak for the Methodist Church or for Emory University. Quote, "Professor Altizer speaks for himself only," end quote. The bishops reminded Altizer that, quote, "freedom requires responsibility," end quote, but they made clear that, quote, "we are committed to the principle of academic freedom. A university presupposes freedom in the search for truth on the part of those associated with it," end quote. The bishops therefore urged full support of the university and expressed their pride in it. At the same time, the Development Office of Emory University issued a statement by William R. Cannon, Dean of the Chandler School of Theology, Emory University, quote, "God is not dead at Emory," end quote. Cannon, after making clear that Altizer teaches in Emory College, not in the School of Theology, affirms academic freedom. Quote, "When a person is brought to a faculty, he is given the opportunity to think freely and is encouraged, both in the laboratory and in a study, to engage in creative scholarship that will lead to new discoveries and open new frontiers of learning. To be sure, we run great risks in this, but the gains far outweigh the risks." End quote. The Emory Board of Trustees chairman, Henry L. Bowden, in a statement released to the press November the 30th, 1965, affirmed the allegiance of Emory, quote, "to the principles of academic freedom as enumerated by the American Association of University Professors." End quote. A similar issue cropped up in Berkeley, California, where the Berkeley Baptist Divinity School of the American Baptist Convention is located. Because of the liberalism of the faculty, many churches have withdrawn support. The president of the school saw this as a denial of academic freedom, and according to the Oakland Tribune for Sunday, December the 4th, 1966, quote, "Dr. Arnott lashed out at those whose doctrinal beliefs do not allow for variance of opinion," end quote. Now, certainly presuppositions clearly appear from these various statements. First, academic freedom means that a teacher has the right to teach and write without any interference, even if his work is hostile to and subversive of the basic purpose of the school. Suicide. I got the slabber mouth. I'm a slabberwocky. Second, it's a merit when any school permits, tolerates, and encourages such teaching. Third, those who refuse to support teaching which is subversive of their faith are guilty of suppressing opinions and are regarded as hostile to liberty. Fourth, the basic function of any school is to encourage new ideas rather than propagate older ones. Lest anyone assume that our description is unfair, let us note what the Columbia Encyclopedia has to say about academic freedom. Quote, "Academic freedom, right of scholars to pursue their research, to teach and to publish without control or restraint from the institutions which employ them. This is a civil right that is enjoyed, at least in statute, by the citizens of democratic countries." Something breathy. It's a bit breathy there, I don't know why. I figured out why I was breathy. I was adjusting the wrong button. I was adjusting the expander gate when I thought it was the low frequency. We've all been there before. In the case of scholars whose occupation is involved with that right, the concept of academic freedom generally includes the property right of tenure of office. An essential to the acceptance of the concept is the notion that truth is best discovered through the open investigation of all data. A less clearly developed corollary of academic freedom is the obligation of all those who enjoy it to pursue the line of open and thorough inquiry regardless of personal considerations. Historically, academic freedom developed in the period of the Enlightenment. End quote. With this last sentence. With this last sentence alone can we agree. The idea is a product of the Enlightenment in its rationalism, its belief in the godlike powers of the philosopher kings. Like God, these thinkers assume they are objective, and like God, beyond any restraint by man. This is the essence of the modern doctrine of academic freedom. It insists implicitly that the scholars are the new gods of creation and are therefore beyond any control, any supervision, or any restraint. Our duty is to support them no matter what they do to us. Let us examine this idea of academic freedom a little more closely. In actuality, it is a totalitarian doctrine which is hostile to real academic freedom. Academic freedom means, if taken literally, freedom of the academy, that is, freedom of the school. It means, or should mean, that anyone has the freedom to establish a school to propagate his ideas and to maintain that school without interference, as long as it does not violate the criminal and moral laws of society. If the ideas of academic freedom stated by Columbia Encyclopedia, the American Association of University Professors, and others were applied to religious freedom, and it is being applied, the results would be anarchy. It would mean that in every church, every kind of religious idea would have equal rights. This would make it impossible to maintain the integrity of any church. The same is true of colleges and universities. Let us assume that we, as a group of persons with a particular kind of religious faith, holding to a system of Christian theology, to a particular school of economics, a type of philosophy, and a very definite concept of education established a college. The modern doctrine of academic freedom would deny us the right to have our kind of school. It would insist we could have no standard of faith and character which we could lost my mind there. It would insist that we could have no standard of faith and character which we could require of all faculty members. The modern doctrine of academic freedom would rob us of the right of controlling our own school, because it would demand the total independence of all faculty members to be, quote, without control or restraint, end quote. We would be obliged to support the school without any right of control, or else we would be called intolerant, fascistic, and many like names for withdrawing our support. The practical result of this doctrine of academic freedom is the destruction of freedom. It denies us the right to establish schools to propagate, develop, and establish a particular faith and philosophy. This concept of academic freedom is a superb totalitarian doctrine and an instrument for the destruction of any and every educational institution. No institution can be free to maintain its faith and philosophy when the total right of subversion is insisted on by the doctrine of so-called academic freedom. All the rights, all the power are placed in the hands of subversives by this idea of academic freedom. The right to hold to a particular faith and philosophy and to maintain a college in loyalty to that position is specifically denied. The doctrine is called academic freedom, but it is actually academic totalitarianism. That doctrine insists that freedom belongs only to that which is new and revolutionary, and it denies freedom to that which insists on loyalty to a given faith and philosophy. It is a viciously intolerant doctrine which, by a semantic trick, calls itself freedom when it is actually slavery. No faith can exist if total right is given to its subversion, and the faith is denied the right to defend itself. The faith attacked by this so-called academic freedom doctrine is Christianity and its concept of absolute truth. The faith affirmed by this doctrine is the faith, as Columbia Encyclopedia indicated, of the Enlightenment, of humanism. Now, humanism has proved to be one of history's most savage and intolerant faiths. The history of humanism is one of terror, slavery, and persecution, but in its rewriting of history it accuses all others of these things. From the French Revolution to the present, this humanistic totalitarianism has been spreading its infection in all the world. The doctrine of academic freedom is one aspect of this totalitarian humanism. It is a doctrine advocating freedom for humanism only. It offers only destruction to all others, plus the requirement of continuing to support. plus the requirement of continuing to support institutions which have betrayed the supporters. Truly free education means that colleges must have the freedom to be themselves, to establish colleges based on a particular philosophy, and to maintain that position against subversion. Atheistic colleges do not allow orthodox Christianity to be taught by their professors, but they call it a violation of academic freedom if a professor in a Christian college is not allowed to teach atheism. Call this by its right name. It is not a doctrine of freedom, but of subversion and totalitarianism. True freedom involves the freedom for a college to be true to its faith, but the champions of this so-called academic freedom are not interested in freedom. They are for slavery because they themselves are slaves, and their doctrine is one of academic enslavement. Beware of men who defend it. Getting that squishy mouth. That squishy, squishy mouth. Oh, yeah. Squishy mouth. Squishy the mouth. Okay. Hockle dockle. Let's try the chapter named 12. Some call it 12. Some call it the number 12. Okay, let me switch that up a little bit. All right. 12. Law and magic. The modern mind tends to dismiss magic as something that belongs to the primitive state of mankind and with no relation of any vital sort to our present-day world. The reality of the matter is that magic is basic to the modern mentality, to our politics and science, and we cannot understand our present-day world without a knowledge of what magic is. It is therefore important to know what magic is. Magic is the attempt by man to gain control over the world of man, nature, and the supernatural. In magic, man attempts to become God over all things and to assert his power and control over all reality. According to Kurt Koch, quote, Koch. According to Kurt Koch, quote, at the threshold of human history stands the command of God, replenish the earth and subdue it, Genesis 1:28. The task and right of man was the peaceful conquest of the earth's powers in agreement with the will of God. In opposition to this command, Satan, the great master of confusion, made the arch temptation. Ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil, Genesis 3:5. The antithesis of the commands of God is magic. Hunger. I lost my mind. Hunger of knowledge and desire for power in opposition to the will of God. With this, young mankind found itself at the crossroads. The points are shifted. Voluntary subordination under the will of God, or compulsion for knowledge and greed for power in rebellion against divine rules and barriers. Today, these points are still shifted. Either we let ourselves be fit into the divine pattern of the way of salvation, or we carry on a rebellion and try to rule the powers of beings of creation in a monstrous rivalry with God. Therefore, magic is arch rebellion from the beginning until today. It is the climax of man's revolt against God. All talk about harmless forces of nature and neutral application is an outrage in the face of this biblical fact. End quote. It is thus obvious that magic is very much a part of our world today. Let us examine some areas. Let us examine some areas in which magic appears. Magic is basic to modern science. The biblical purpose of science is that man should seek knowledge in order that he might exercise dominion over the earth under God. Science, in this sense, is a necessary activity and sphere of knowledge for Christian cultures, but science today bypasses God and seeks to gain power without restraint and seeks knowledge as a tool of total power. Increasingly, science functions not under the law of God, but as the new law of creation, as the new source of law and power. Instead of being governed by morality, science seeks to govern morality and to remake it in terms of its own standards. The purposes of science can be summed up as prediction, planning, and control. Science is thus a basic and essential part of the new politics because their goals coincide. They are both clearly totalitarian. A scientific world is a controlled world, a world of experimentation, and valid experiments require a control of all factors. As a result, scientific society is a planned society, a society in which there is no liberty, because liberty is not possible in a situation of scientific planning. As a result, the more our culture is dominated by this new science, apostate science, the more totalitarian it will become. Modern science not only rests on magic, it is a form of magic. It is the belief that all things can be potentially or ultimately controlled by man. Our politics today is also governed by magic, by the faith that man can become his own God and remake the world to his heart's desire. The techniques of magic are no longer crude and primitive. They have been refined and developed into a science. But the purposes of magic remain unchanged and today govern both science and politics. I'm going to have to give my tongue a squeeze. The political orders of our world have separated themselves from Christianity because they feel no need for God. They feel no need for God because they plan to become the new gods of creation. They plan to abolish sin and guilt, poverty, disease and hunger, even death itself, and create a new paradise on earth. The new politics is a politics of control, The new politics is the politics of total control, and it therefore hates God because God represents a roadblock to power. God is the enemy who must be destroyed so that man can become his own God. The Fabian socialist leader and teacher D.D.H. Cole stated that an objective of socialism is the, quote, abolition of God, end quote. The logic of scientific socialism requires this goal. If man is to be the total agent of control, then God cannot be, and God must be abolished. The new politics is therefore the politics of anti-Christianity. It is the politics of magic, and magic has always been an enemy of biblical faith. The Bible forbids magic because magic is, by its total nature, in enmity. It's total nature. In enmity to God. In a variety of passages, magic is strictly forbidden. For example, Exodus 22:18, Leviticus 19:26, 31, 26 and 27, Deuteronomy 18:10, 11, Isaiah 8:19, Micah 5:12, Malachi 3:5, Galatians 5:20, etc. Its purpose, according to Scripture, is to divert people from God to man, Isaiah 8:19. Another important area where magic prevails today is in art. T.H. Robson Gibbings, in his study Mona Lisa's Moustache, a dissection of modern art, observed that, quote, modern arts is not modern at all. It is a revival of one of the oldest systems for getting power. It is a revival of magic, end quote. The modern artists are totalitarians who despise man and liberty. As Robson Gibbings noted, quote, According to the futurists, man has no more significance than a stone. We find Kandinsky, the leader of Expressionism, writing haughtily of the vulgar herd and the mob. We find the surrealists insisting on the, quote, greatest possible obliteration of individuality, and Picasso, the leader of Cubism, calling for a dictatorship of one painter. To men such as these, art could be only a medium through which they would gain power over the fellow feelings. I'm just drawing near the end of my powers. To men such as these, art could be only a medium through which they would gain power over the fellow beings they consider so insignificant. End quote. The modern magical artist hates above all to be moral, law-abiding and meaningful. He belongs, in his imagination, to an elite group whose purpose is to smash the present order and remake it totally in terms of their own elitist plans. According to one artist's manifesto, quote, the artist should be understood as a contemporary magician. How are we to wield power? How are we to influence? And not, are we scientists or poets? Is the question to be posed. Seers we are for the magic of life. End quote. Modern art seeks to destroy God's meaning, to obliterate it from man's mind so that man will no longer see God's order in things, but will relearn all things as taught by magical art. Its purpose, thus, is total brainwashing. Modern education is also dedicated to magic, to man's total control of all reality, and man's remaking of all things in terms of human planning. State-controlled schools have replaced religion with magic, and the goal of education today is the same as that of ancient magicians, the total control of all reality by man. It is a serious error to treat magic as a relic of the past. The desire for magic is deeply embedded in the heart of man. It is basic to his original sin. Satan's temptation was, ye shall be as gods, knowing, that is, determining or establishing for yourself good and evil. Genesis 3:5. Man, by his own will, can become God. He is told by Satan that he can not only become his own God and remake all things according to his will, but that his will is creative and determinative. What man wishes, that man can do. Every vagrant dream of man's sinful and proud heart, magic tells him, is a possibility. And now modern science and the new politics, scientific socialism, tell man that they're about to make real this magical hope. The appeal of scientific socialism is the appeal of magic. It is the belief that man's imagination, rather than Almighty God, is the ultimate governing and creating force in the universe. Every belief in magic is therefore firmly set on a collision course. Collision with God's purpose and judgment is inescapable. Because the science and politics of magic openly declare war against God and his government, they invite that collision, and they invite it in the confidence that they shall kill God and abolish him. In their pride, they cannot tolerate the thought that there is a God over them. Friedrich Nietzsche, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, wrote, quote, but that I may reveal my heart entirely unto you, my friends, if there were gods, how could I endure it to be no God? Therefore, there are no gods. End quote. In other words, Nietzsche's main objection to God was that he himself was not God, therefore he declared that there can be no God if I cannot be one. Having quote-unquote abolished God, Nietzsche proceeded to declare himself a God and also the creator of a new world, for, quote, what would there be to create if there were gods? End quote. This is the mind and world of pure magic, and its conclusion, as in Nietzsche's life, is madness and some form of self-destruction. We face then a conflict between two worlds of law, the law of God versus the law of magic, of the new politics, science and education, of humanism in its essence. Of the conclusion there can be no doubt. The psalmist said of Christ the King, quote, "Thou shalt break them in pieces with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise, therefore, now, O ye kings, be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him." Psalm 2, 9 and 12. Let's try that last bit again. Psalm 2, 9 and 12. Psalm 2, 9 and 12. Alrighty, well, that's me tapped out. I'm going to watch some parkour videos now and have a cup of tea as my recreation. Recreation's what you need. Okay, guys, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you again for the next